Welcome to the first lecture on the road to war. This series will cover the years 1933, when Hitler came to power, to 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. We will be focusing on two key themes: Hitler's actions and the Allies' reaction to these actions. In this first lecture, we will examine Hitler's foreign policy aims to understand how these created a clear road to war. The first section will examine Hitler's foreign policy aims. We will then examine the Allies' initial reaction to Hitler's key aims. We will then examine Hitler's first actions to fulfill these aims from 1933 to 1935. Hitler made very clear in his election speeches that he wished to overturn the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. He therefore refused to pay any more of the reparations bill and ignored the military restrictions by embarking on a rearmament program. He also made his intentions clear to invade territories that had been removed as part of the treaty. Hitler made his intentions to rebuild the German military very clear. This made war more likely, because he was enrolling large numbers of young men into the army. He was also investing heavily in the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, which would become an important part in World War II combat. As part of his economic policy, he also hired many workers in new munition factories to build weapons. This meant that neighboring countries began secretly building up their military too. Hitler also believed that all German-speaking people should be unified under one greater nation. This was called Volksdeutsch, and this new greater nation was called the Third Reich. This would inevitably mean invading neighboring countries, especially those that had been part of Germany before World War I. As part of Volksdeutsch, Hitler believed that Germany should be allowed to unify with their once great ally Austria, in what was called Anschluss. Austria and Germany shared a language and history, alongside many aspects of their culture, as they had once formed part of the Great Holy Roman Empire. However, in the early 1930s, the Austrian government and many Austrian people did not want to unite with Germany, so this would prove a point of conflict. Hitler also believed that Germany was simply not large enough for its growing population. He therefore wished to invade neighboring countries, especially to the east, so to create living space for the German people. This was called Lebensraum, and would inevitably cause conflict, since as part of the Paris Peace Conference the Allied powers had vowed to protect the new nations of Poland and Czechoslovakia. Hitler made no secret of his hatred for communism. Many German people voted him into power, as they saw the Nazi Party as the strongest defense against the rise of communism in Germany. Therefore, as part of Hitler's foreign policy aims, he expressed a desire to eradicate communism from Europe. This would inevitably place him in direct conflict with the USSR. Let's now examine how the Allies reacted to Hitler's foreign policy. Throughout the mid to late 1930s, Britain would follow a policy of appeasement. This was the view that if they allowed Hitler to achieve some of his key aims, then this would satisfy him and prevent another great European conflict. In 1934, Germany signed a peace pact with neighboring Poland, and the British government saw this as proof that Hitler did not seek war. There was a very strong anti-war feeling amongst the British public, who had suffered due to the lost generation of soldiers, and then again, in the early 30s due to the Great Depression. Furthermore, there was a feeling by 1933 that the Treaty of Versailles had been too harsh, and that Hitler was right to discard the terms in order to rebuild Germany's economy and international reputation. France had suffered greatly during the 1930s as a result of the Great Depression, and so the French government had to deal with a high level of social unrest, such as rioting. This meant that they were in no position to focus on foreign policy and putting up a strong stand against Hitler. However, the French public were less forgiving than the British public, and they were nervous of Hitler's rearmament program, especially those who lived near the border to Germany. However, without Britain's support, France did not feel like they were in a strong enough position to put up military resistance against Hitler's actions. Throughout the interwar period, the USA followed an isolationist policy. This was a policy whereby they did not become involved in foreign policy, especially in terms of European relations. This is because there was a general mood amongst politicians and the public that they should not become involved in another world conflict. Added to this, the Great Depression meant that unemployment rose as high as 25%, so the American President Franklin D. Roosevelt focused on economic policy. Roosevelt also won re-election in 1936 by promising that America would stay out of a European conflict. Having said this, America did slowly and quietly build up their armed forces throughout the 1930s, on the unlikely event that this promise was broken. The USSR is the term used to describe Russia under communist rule. It is sometimes also referred to as the Soviet Union. In the 1930s, the USSR was the only communist nation, and Hitler's threat to destroy communism and invade Eastern Europe worried the USSR's leader Joseph Stalin. However, Stalin was not prepared to declare war against Germany in 1933, because he was only partway through a decade-long economic and rearmament program, which was designed to equip Russia for the next Great War. Let's now examine Hitler's first steps between 1933 and 1935. These were his first steps toward achieving his foreign policy aims, and they were not nearly as radical as the steps he takes in the late 1930s. In many ways, you could say his first actions were used to test the water to see how the Allies reacted. The first significant action came in 1933, during the year when Hitler was Chancellor, but not yet Führer of Germany. Hitler attended a meeting hosted by the League of Nations that was designed to achieve collective disarmament, in other words, for several countries to multilaterally decide to decommission their weapons and reduce their armed forces. As part of this conference, Hitler insisted that France should have the same sized army as Germany, so to provide mutual security. This was a prosperous suggestion to France, who saw it as their right as the victors of World War I to have a larger army, especially since it had been Germany that had crossed France's borders. Since no agreement could be made, Hitler stormed out of the conference and then withdrew Germany from the League of Nations. This had serious implications for the League since they had lost their second council member in under 2 years. In 1934, Hitler attempted to achieve Anschluss, the unification of Germany with Austria. However, his actions were premature, and the attempt failed. The Austrian Chancellor reacted to Hitler's threat by banning the Nazi Party in Austria. In retaliation, Hitler instructed Austrian Nazis to rebel against their government, and this resulted in Dollfuss being assassinated. Despite this, the plot failed because the Austrian army supported their government to put down the rebellion. The Dollfuss affair, as it came to be known, taught Hitler a valuable lesson. Firstly, it taught him to strike at the right time, when in a more powerful position. Secondly, it taught him that he could not rely on public or military support in Austria to achieve Anschluss, and so would need to use more underhand tactics. This he does in 1938, when he succeeds in his second attempt at Anschluss. January 1935 marked 15 years since the coalfield region of the Saar had been placed under the control of the League of Nations. Under the terms of Versailles, this meant it should be returned to Germany. A plebiscite, or vote of the common people, was held to find out if the people of the region wished to reunite with Germany. The vote came in at 90% in favor of reunification. This was a great victory for Hitler, as it showed that those territories removed as part of Versailles contained populations that supported his aim of Volksdeutsch. Furthermore, since the Saar was a rich coalfield and industrial area, it provided valuable fuel to boost the Nazi rearmament and munitions program. Let's now examine how the Allies reacted to these early actions. Firstly, in April 1935, France, Italy and Britain met to reaffirm their alliance. They met in an Italian town called Stresa, so their agreement is known as the Stresa Front. As part of the meeting, they agreed to uphold the Locarno Pact of 1925, which was where the territorial borders surrounding Germany were agreed. They also pledged to protect Austria's independence. However, at this point, the Abyssinian crisis was ongoing, and so the relationship between Britain, France, and Italy was strained. Due to Mussolini's clearly aggressive actions, it was difficult for them to project a united front to the rest of the world. As a result, Hitler did not take the agreement seriously, and in 1936 he would successfully form the Rome-Berlin Axis, which was an alliance between Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. Later that year, in June 1935, Germany made a significant deal with Britain, known as the Anglo-Naval Agreement. This was where Britain agreed that Germany could build up its navy to 35% the size of Britain's navy. This included permission to build submarines, which were a cutting-edge development in naval warfare. Britain did this to ensure their naval supremacy, and so were acting out of their own interests. However, as a country landlocked on three sides, Germany did not need a navy of this size. It simply gave fuel to Hitler's rearmament ambitions, since he was very unlikely to stop building up the navy once he had reached this agreed limit. Furthermore, the specification of 35% meant that both countries could continue to grow their navies ahead of a future conflict. Throughout this unit, I will be using the term road to war to describe the escalation of tensions between Germany and other European powers, which led to the outbreak of World War II. If Germany was the vehicle going at high speed down the motorway to this inevitable and grim location, then the Allies and USSR were the roadblocks. This is because they had the power collectively to stop Hitler in his tracks, especially in these early years. The fact that they did not work together as a united force and put up a firm stand against Hitler's actions means that these nations had to brunt some of the responsibility for the outbreak of World War II in 1939. Let's return to the overarching question of how did Hitler's foreign policy aims create a road to war? Firstly, Hitler's foreign policy aims were clearly and openly aggressive. In order to achieve them, he would need to invade other countries and break multiple terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Secondly, the Allies did not stop Hitler when they were in a position to do so. Instead, Britain chose a policy of appeasement and America chose a policy of isolationism, which meant France and the USSR did not feel adequately supported to make a stand against him. Finally, Hitler took careful steps in the early years to test the waters, before making much bolder moves from 1936 onwards. For each of these actions, the Allies were ineffective in their reaction, which meant Hitler was bold enough to take even bigger steps along the road to war. Thank you for listening. Tune into the next lecture to learn about the reoccupation of the Rhineland in 1936 and how this escalated tensions between Germany and the rest of Europe.